Hey, what's up there, YouTubers? Edgemon sent a drop coming to you guys here today with another deck tech. So today we're going to be taking a look at a standard deck, and it is 4-color controls. So an enormous amount of you guys have been requesting this deck, asking for advice on what stuff is good, what you should be running in a 4-color control deck, and all those kinds of things. And aside from you guys requesting it, this was also another deck that I wanted to cover and I wanted to play for standard competitive and take it to events and do well with it. So it took a lot of time to really get it to where I like to run 4-color control, but finally I have it here today and I'm going to be sharing it with you guys. So before we get to that, if you guys have any suggestions for decks that you would like to see, please leave that down in the comments below and I'll take it into consideration for future deck techs. And remember to check out the playlist in the description below, where I have all the previous decks that I've covered archived, so I could have already covered something that you're wanting to request, so be sure to check that out. Now, the first thing that we're taking a look at here with this deck is the land base, and this was seriously the hardest part about this deck and what I really wanted to run. We're running 25 lands, and just figuring out the mana that we wanted to use, the exposure of each color, and essentially how many of each copy of land I wanted to use. I think that was the hardest part about getting this deck to really work, but I've worked it out to where we don't really have too many problems when we're running this deck. So the land base breaks down into steam vents as a 4 of, giving us blue and red. And blue and red is they're both essential colors for the build. They're probably the most prominent colors. And we essentially want to have double blue as soon as possible so we can play cards like Jace, Architect of Thought. Also, exposure to red early on for stuff like Mizzium Mortars, post-sideboarding, Pillar of Flame against aggro matchups and zombies and stuff like that. And we essentially want to have triple red to be able to overload Mizzium Mortars and be able to wipe out a huge amount of things. So there's a fair amount of double colors and I guess triple colors as well in the build, so we want to have the appropriate colors for them. From there we have Blood Crypt, so we're running 3 Blood Crypts for black and red. We also have 1 Overgrown Tomb, so total we have 8 shock lands here. From there we have Sulfur Falls, so we're running a playset of Sulfur Falls. And if you guys are wondering about this altered print of Sulfur Falls, there's a link down below where you guys can find it and purchase some if you're interested in them from ABUGames.com. Alright, so playset of Sulfur Falls. From there we have Drowned Catacomb, so we're running 3 Drowned Catacomb. Woodland Cemetery, we're running 2 of them, so black and green. Hinterland Harbor for green and blue, we're just running 1. We have Evolving Wilds in the build, and this is going to be a 2 of. And Evolving Wilds is essential because we still want to have a little bit of fixing aside from using cards like Chromatic Lantern. Whenever we don't have the Lantern, we still want to be on spot with what colors we have and what we need. So Evolving Wilds is very appropriate for the build. And it also lets us thin our deck out from basic lands, and ultimately it reduces the chance of drawing into more lands by just a slight little bit, but it still is a factor in the way that you're going to be drawing in future turns. So we're running 2 Evolving Wilds. And we're not running Farseek because green is only a splash in this build for cards like Thragtusk. From there we have Desolate Lighthouse, so it's the only utility land that we have and it's just a 1 of, but for the 3 mana and you tap the Desolate Lighthouse, you get to draw a card and then discard a card, which is good. We want to have a good amount of ways to be able to draw even if we're not using cards like Think Twice. From there we have our basics, so 2 basic islands. We have 1 basic forest and 1 basic mountain. So that's our land base of 25 lands. Definitely the most difficult part of building this deck. And I think it's a big thing that discourages people if they don't know how to build a mana base for a 4-color deck like this one. It definitely takes away a big portion of how the deck is going to operate and how effectively it will actually work whenever you want it to. But from there, we have everything else in our deck. So we're starting off with creatures in ascending mana cost order. So we have Snapcaster Mage. He's a 3-of, and he's just enormous. Whenever you start flashing back things like counter spells, also Mizzium Mortars, Dreadbore to get rid of more things, Snapcaster is just enormous. I think the thing that I like to use most is post-sideboard, being able to cast Slaughter Games and then flash it back with Snapcaster, and you essentially get rid of the bulk of your opponent's deck, and you just get rid of anything that they might use to win the game, like Angel of Serenity, Thragtusk, and treat the Angels depending on how many they're running and what build it is, but you really just get rid of the nuts and bolts of their deck with Slaughter Games, and Snapcaster giving you the opportunity to flash it back is just abuse. But 3 Snapcasters, there's a lot of different targets that you can flash back with Snapcaster that are effective. From there, we have Olivia Voldaren, so she is pretty tremendous herself. She's a 3/3 for 4 flying, and she has 2 abilities. Her first one is 2 mana, 1 generic, 1 red. She deals 1 damage to another creature, and that creature becomes a vampire. In addition to its other types, put a +1/+1 counter on Olivia Voldaren. And her second ability is for 5 mana, gain control of target vampire, and as long as you control Olivia Voldaren. So as long as you maintain control of Olivia Voldaren, you're going to be able to just take your opponent's things. If it's something out of reach with removal, we're just able to take all of your opponent's things, and even whenever your opponent's stuff isn't necessarily favorable to take, she can become bigger with her 2 mana ability. So with that, she's becoming a bigger and bigger evasion threat each time you start pinging creatures, or even if you do it on your own creatures. If you have a Thragtusk out and you decide to ping him twice and just make her 2 power and toughness bigger, that's still very relevant because you have use of your mana and you're going to be dealing more damage ultimately. But from there, speaking of Thragtusk, we have Thragtusk in the build, so we're running him as a 3-of, 5/3 creature. Whenever he enters the battlefield, we gain 5 life. Whenever he leaves the battlefield, we get a 3/3, making him nice against removal and board wiping elements, stuff of that nature. From there, we have Niv-Mizzet Dracogenius, so we're running him as a 2-of. He's pretty huge himself as well. 5/5 for 6, again, flying, evasion is irrelevant. And whenever he deals damage to a player, we can draw a card, and he has an ability for 1 blue and 1 red. And he can deal 1 damage to target creature or player. And essentially, with all of our mana late game, we can either just outright start drawing an enormous amount of cards each turn, and searching for answers, or we can just start getting rid of our opponent's creatures if they have small enough creatures that we can use the abilities and just get rid of them. But from there, we have our Planeswalkers, so we have Jace, Architect of Thought. So the big thing about Jace is if we get him turn 4, he's really huge. His biggest feature is his -2 half factor fiction, and that's what we're going to be going for most. His +1 is alright. He defends himself fairly well, I want to say, and you as well, but his +2 is relevant. It lets you dig a little bit. It lets you dig in 3 cards, get the best thing in the situation that you need, and ultimately he just helps you out in getting the resolutions and the answers that you need. The -8 bribery for yourself and your opponent it's there. We don't always use it, but if we need to use it, if we're not getting any win conditions or anything like that, the bribery is there, and if we can get to it, we'll use it. From there, we have Tamiyo, so we're running 2 Tamiyo in the build as well, so 5 cost for loyalty, +1 to tap down a permanent that our opponent controls, and it doesn't untap during their next untap step. -2, we draw cards equal to the amount of tapped creatures target player controls, and -8 is where we want to be with the emblem that gives us no hand size, and whenever a card goes to our graveyard from anywhere, we can put it into our hand instead. So she gives us a incredible amount of recycling with our spells whenever we get that emblem, and it should not, you should be in the position where you're going to win with the Tamiyo emblem whenever you get it. I mean, for the most part, whenever you get a Planeswalker's emblem, it's for the most part that your opponent hasn't really been doing much because they haven't been able to get rid of the Planeswalker, so you're already, in a sense, going to be ahead, but whenever you get that emblem, it should be really set in stone that you win with all of the other spells that you have in your hand that you've probably been hoarding up, like removal, counter spells, other big things like Thragtusk. He hits the grave and he's just going to come back. You get him back into your hand and you can replay him, but at the point where you're casting or where you're putting your Planeswalker's abilities onto the stack, if you're at that point where you're ready to ultimate, chances are that you're already ahead. So from there we have Vraska the Unseen, so 5 loyalty, 5 cost, +1 is, her +1's alright in defending her. If creatures attack her, they're going to die, but the -3 I think is the most relevant thing, where it's destroy target non-land permanent, so it's as close as you could get to Vindicate as possible, so that's why we have her in here, just as a one-of for that slight Vindicate, the Vindicate without being able to target lands, but being able to use it twice, maybe 3 times, is really good at getting rid of problematic things. From there, Nicol Bolas, so 5 loyalty, 8 cost, +3 we get to destroy target non-creature permanents, so enchantments, planeswalkers, artifacts, annoying things. -2 gain control of target creature, which is also pretty relevant, and -9 just blow up the board. Deals 7 damage to target player, they discard 7 cards, sacrifice 7 permanents, so when you ultimate with Nicol Bolas, he just wrecks face. You should be able to win from there. Or at least you have such a huge advantage to where you're going to be able to win with no problem. Then we have our Chromatic Lantern, so we're running Chromatic Lantern as a play set. It's a 3 cost card, and it gives our lands the ability to tap for any 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, and the Chromatic Lantern itself taps for any 1 color of any mana, so that's also nice. It accelerates us along a little bit. The nicest thing is you want to remember that Chromatic Lantern also gives the ability for Evolving Wilds to tap for any color of mana, and I think that's something that a lot of players forget, because when I see them running Lantern and Evolving Wilds, they'll play the Evolving Wilds, tap it and search for something, and they won't hit into that play that they wanted to do for the turn. Like if it's turn 4 and they didn't get the appropriate mana that they need to play a 5 cost card or something like that, they'll Evolving Wilds and get their land, and they always forget that Lantern gives the ability to tap for mana to Evolving Wilds. So keep that in mind. From there we have Think Twice. So Think Twice is a 3-of in the build, so pretty plain and simple. It's a draw spell. 2 mana, we draw a card. Flashback for 3, we draw a card. So we have that. We have 1 Rakdos' return, so X amount of mana, 1 black, 1 red. Target opponent is going to lose that X amount of life, and they're going to have to discard X amount of cards. So against a lot of decks is good. I think against like Reanimator it's pretty redundant, because chances are they're going to have like an Unburial Rites, or already have an Unburial Rites and they're just waiting for a way to discard a big creature or something like that. So I think against everything other than Reanimator, Rakdos' return is pretty relevant, so it's still a really huge and awesome card. From there we have Mizzium Mortars, so removal for our deck. 1 generic, 1 red, deals 4 damage to target creature we don't control, and it has an overload for 6 mana, triple red, and 3 generic. So we're running 2 Mizzium Mortars in the build. It's really nice with the overload, just being able to wipe out everything with 4 or less toughness. Likewise, with board wiping, we have Blasphemous Act, which a lot of players have been making the transition to running this card, but Blasphemous Act is pretty huge when it comes to dealing with cards like Sigarda, and I think a lot of those decks that are just coming out now in this season of Return to Ravnica Standard, where they're running like the enchantment decks where they just play a lot of enchantments on hexproof guys and unblockable guys like Invisible Stalker, Blasphemous Act just wrecks and just gets rid of everything. And I think even with Snapcaster, you can Snapcaster it and replay it, and the value's still there. Blasphemous Act is definitely really good in board wiping when we don't have the mana, when we don't have the appropriate colors to be running Supreme Verdict. From there we have Sever the Bloodline. So Sever the Bloodline is a 4-cost sorcery, and we get to exile target creature and all other creatures with the same name as that creature. It's a big and nice removal spell because it exiles, and it has a flashback for 7, so we can use it twice, which is also really awesome. From there we have Dreadbore, so we're running 2 Dreadbores in the deck. 1 black, 1 red, destroy target creature or Planeswalker. Then we have our counter spells, so we have 2 Essence Scatters, and I think it's pretty appropriate for the main board because a lot of decks are running creatures, and even control builds, whenever it comes into play, like whenever you're playing against Bant control and stuff like that, they're going to be running green for Thragtusk. So I think the biggest thing with Essence Scatter is being able to counter stuff like Angel of Serenity when it's hard cast, Armada Worms, Thragtusks, any big stuff. Even if they try to Restoration Angel on Thragtusk when it's already in there. Essence Scatter definitely does a lot to just get your opponent off tempo and not hitting into the creatures that they want to be playing. And I mean, also stuff like Huntmaster too. Huntmaster's annoying, and you just want to keep your opponent down from playing creatures and use as little removal until it's really, really necessary. So we have 2 Essence Scatters for creature spells. If it's not relevant, we just side it out. And then we have 2 Dissipates, which is a little bit more relevant against everything. So just the 3 mana instant counter target spell. If it's countered that way, it's going to be exiled instead. So that's good against stuff like Unburial Rites, and also against Thragtusks. I think it's relevant when in the Reanimator, Junk Reanimator type decks where they can easily just reanimate that Thragtusk after it goes to the grave and just do more shenanigans off of it. But Dissipate's just the all-around catch-all to being able to counter. So now we're going to look at the sideboard options that we have. So we have another Blasphemous Act for all of those decks that have like hexproof creatures, Sigardas and stuff like that, where we can just ultimately wipe and get rid of everything. Also, really creature-heavy decks, if they're trying to run like token decks, stuff like that, we can just wipe out with Blasphemous Act. Anything with a large amount of creatures, we have the ability to make Blasphemous Act a lot cheaper, so it becomes more permissible in the build, and it becomes really good. But I think the best thing about it is it just gets rid of all the hexproof things like Sigarda, and Sigarda is a big problem to a lot of decks. Tribute to Hunger, this is more so for early on for the enchantment decks that have been floating around, the Bant enchantments and blue-white enchantments as well. But earlier on, whenever they play like Invisible Stalker and will overcommit on him, we're able to just Tribute to Hunger, and effectively, if we've already gotten rid of other things, like if they're playing Pilgrims or something in the Bant form, whenever we are assured that they only have 1 creature out there, like Stalker or something that they're overcommitting with, we can Tribute to Hunger and make them get rid of it. So I wanted the 1 Tribute just to have a way to get rid of things in that type of a deck where we can't necessarily get rid of it with conventional removal. From there we have Cyclonic Rift, so the Overload's relevant, but just return target non-land permanent to you don't control to its owner's hand for 2 mana. It's nice to be able to bounce back things in an instant, but the Overload is really where we want to be with that card, just being able to bounce back everything, and then possibly playing Rakdos Return. It's a little bit, you have to get it to work in that sense, and you have to be like really lucky to have that work, but Overload with the Rift and Rakdos Return has been something that I have done once or twice, but it doesn't happen very often. But if you can get it to work, it's totally awesome. From there we have Pillar of Flame, so we're running 2 Pillar of Flame in the sideboard, and this is more so for zombie decks and stuff like that. I didn't want to include it in the main board because there's a lot of decks where Pillar of Flame, it just doesn't do anything. So Pillar of Flame is there for aggro decks, zombie decks, anything we want to just exile and not worry about. So 2 Pillar of Flame. Likewise, we have Annihilating Fire as a 2-of. And with it, we're going to be using it at an instant speed to get rid of stuff like the key runes. The Rakdos key rune is relevant to get rid of. Also, Thragtusk, whenever it comes in, we can get rid of it on the spot. Olivia's, if they can't buff it. after putting it out there. And it just hits into a lot of different things. Messengers against zombies and stuff like that. Annihilating Fire is also good. I think the instant speed is what makes it really nice. And it makes it sideboardable, to use improper words. But it's definitely good sideboard tech against a lot of different decks where it's relevant because of that instant speed. Pillar of Flame is good, but it's awkward whenever they start using stuff like key runes and you don't have a way to get rid of them. From there, like we mentioned before, we're running 2 Slaughter Games in the sideboard. So Slaughter Games is just a catch-all to get rid of big threats that we may run into. Thragtusks are annoying. Angel of Serenity is annoying. Other things, against control, if we can get rid of their Jace. If we already got rid of like Thragtusk whenever it comes to control, then we get rid of Jace. They don't really have too many ways to win. So I think that's another really effective way to go about it. But flashing it back is awesome. From there we have one Vraska. So we have another Vraska in the sideboard, I think more so for control than anything else, to get rid of enchantments and stuff like that. So we run her. She's a threat herself just because she starts getting rid of your opponent's things and you just start building up your board a little bit better. From there we have our counter spells. So we have 2 negates in the sideboard. So non-creature spell is more so effective against stuff like control, also mid-range builds. We start countering their things. We have Dissipate, so we're running another Dissipate in the sideboard, so another just counter all the things that are counterable. So for 3 mana, just counter a spell and not let it go to the grave, exile it instead. We have one Sever the Bloodline, so again, it's just a really huge removal for anything, and it exiles instead of killing it, so that's nice as well. And it has the flashback. And then we have another Dreadbore. So whenever Dreadbore is relevant against mid-range builds, more specifically Jund mid-range, we have another source of just removal for creatures and planeswalkers likewise. So that is the 4-color control deck. If you guys enjoyed it, please be sure to like, favorite, and subscribe for more Magic the Gathering content. And until next time, guys, have a wonderful, fun-filled Magic the Gathering day.